As Saul's reign crumbled, a young shepherd named David rose to prominence after defeating Goliath. His victories made him a national hero, but also Saul's greatest threat. Despite Saul's hatred for David, his son Jonathan loved David as a brother. They formed a deep covenantal friendship. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. 1 Samuel 18:3-4. This was symbolic to his acceptance that David was God's chosen king. A time came when the Philistines attacked Israel at Mount Gilboa. Saul's army was defeated, and his sons, including Jonathan, were killed. As a result, David was then anointed king over Judah, and he united all of Israel under his rule after years of civil war. Following the death of Saul, other members of his family and servants fled. Only a remnant remained. Among them is a servant, Ziba, who took charge of King Saul's estate, managing lands that no longer had an heir. He thought. The wealth was there, but who could claim it? Ziba had served Saul well, and now, without a ruler to command him, he grew comfortable in authority and was desiring to covet the deceased king's wealth. Meanwhile, the house of King Saul was not entirely wiped away. His grandson Mephibosheth the crippled was alive, the only surviving heir, but he was far away in Lo-debar, on exile, hiding from his father's enemies. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth, 2 Samuel 4:4. But years has passed, and Mephibosheth is grown, yet long forgotten. 2 Samuel 9:12 reveals that Mephibosheth begot a young son named Micah, whilst still exiled in Lo-debar. Now the mighty warrior King David had conquered lands, subdued enemies, and established his rule. But on this day, his heart was stirred by something greater than war, compassion. Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? 2 Samuel 9:1. A hush fell over the court. David's servants exchanged glances. Saul's dynasty had long fallen. Who could still be alive from his house? Then a name surfaced, Ziba. With Saul dead and David reigning, he had positioned himself well, managing Saul's lands and wealth. Ziba was summoned before the king. He entered the royal court, his posture humble but his mind calculating. King David's gaze bore into him. "Are you Ziba?" "Yes, my lord, your servant," Ziba responded. David leaned forward. "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God?" A pause. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Ziba's eyes. Then he answered, "There is still a son of Jonathan, who is lame in his feet." 2 Samuel 9:3. "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. 2 Samuel 9:4-5. Ziba bowed, but as he left the king's presence, his mind raced. The return of Mephibosheth could change everything. If David restored him, what would become of Ziba's control over Saul's estate? He had to watch closely, very closely. Ziba obeyed, traveling to the desolate land of Lo-debar. The place was fitting for a man stripped of his birthright, barren, isolated, a land of no pasture. There in the house of Machir lived Mephibosheth, a man who had once been destined for a throne, but now hobbled through life with the weight of his past. When Ziba arrived, Mephibosheth's heart pounded. A summons from King David? Was this the end? Had the king finally decided to eliminate the last remnant of Saul's house? They journeyed back to Jerusalem to meet King David. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, "Mephibosheth, at your service," he replied. 2 Samuel 9:6. Mephibosheth's hands trembled as he bowed before the king. His mind swirled with fear. What would David do to him? David's next words shattered his expectations. "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." 2 Samuel 9:7. A gasp escaped from Mephibosheth's lips. This was not judgment. This was grace. But Ziba, standing in the background, clenched his jaw. David's decree meant the lands of Saul, which Ziba had managed for years, now belonged to Mephibosheth. Still on the floor, Mephibosheth stammered, "What is your servant, that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" 2 Samuel 9:8. David ignored the self-deprecation. Instead, his eyes turned to Ziba. Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. 2 Samuel 9:9-10. Ziba had spent years cultivating his influence. Would he let this crippled man take it all away? So Mephibosheth and his young son named Micah ate at David's table like one of the king's sons, and all the members of Ziba's household became his servants. Ziba had sworn loyalty. He had bowed before King David and accepted his new role, a servant to Mephibosheth. Outwardly, he remained loyal, managing the estate, ensuring that the land produced crops. Yet deep inside, resentment festered like a hidden wound. Before this day, he had control. He had managed Saul's vast estates without interference. He had influence. He had power. Now everything belonged to Mephibosheth. And Ziba? He was reduced to a laborer, working land he once ruled. He watched all of this in silence. Days turned to months, months to years. Ziba remained in the shadows, waiting. He knew that life in the palace was unpredictable. Power shifted like the wind. And one day, an opportunity would come. Then it did. What event will change everything for Ziba? A storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of David's kingdom. Absalom, David's own son, had risen in rebellion. With cunning words and stolen loyalty, he turned the hearts of Israel against his father. Then, Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron,' 2 Samuel 15:10. Soon the unthinkable happened. David fled Jerusalem, leaving his throne behind. The mighty warrior king, now an old man, walked barefoot up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword." 2 Samuel 15:14. In the chaos, Ziba saw his moment. David had barely left Jerusalem when he was met by an unexpected sight. a caravan laden with supplies. Donkeys loaded with food and wine stood before him, and leading them was none other than Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. David, weary from his flight, looked at the provisions and asked, "What do you mean to do with these?" Ziba bowed deeply, his voice smooth. "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the wilderness." 2 Samuel 16:2. "And where is your master's son?" He meant Mephibosheth. Ziba's answer came swiftly. "Indeed, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me.'" 2 Samuel 16:3. The words struck David like a dagger. Mephibosheth, the man he had honored, the one who ate at his table. David's heart burned. There was no time to investigate, no way to confirm. He was in exile, his throne uncertain. And now it seemed another former ally had turned against him. In that moment, David made a decision. "Here," he said, looking at Ziba, "all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." 2 Samuel 16:4. Ziba fell to the ground in gratitude. "I humbly bow before you, that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king." But in his heart, victory burned. He had done it. With a single lie, he had taken back everything. The lands, the power, the influence, everything he had lost was now his again. Yet was this truly the end of the matter? Was Mephibosheth truly a traitor? Or had Ziba deceived the king? The truth would not stay hidden forever. Absalom's rebellion did not last. Though he had seized the throne, his downfall was swift and brutal. In the forests of Ephraim, he met his end. His long hair caught in the branches of a tree, his body suspended between heaven and earth. Joab, David's commander, wasted no time. He thrust 3 spears into Absalom's heart, ending the rebellion for good. Now King David was returning to Jerusalem. But with his return came unfinished business. Among those who came to meet him was Mephibosheth. The sight was shocking. His clothes were torn, his beard unkempt, his feet unwashed. A man who had neither groomed himself nor cared for his appearance since the day David fled. This was not the image of a man who had rejoiced in the king's downfall. "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" Mephibosheth looked up, his voice filled with sorrow. He said, "My lord the king, since I your servant am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba my servant betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserved nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king?" 2 Samuel 19:26-28. David exhaled. The truth was murky. He had acted in haste when he granted Ziba all of Mephibosheth's land. Finally he spoke, "You and Ziba shall divide the land." 2 Samuel 19:29. David had spoken. The land would be divided. But had justice truly been served? Mephibosheth did not protest. He cared nothing for wealth, only that David had returned. His words rang with sincerity. "Let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house." 2 Samuel 19:30. Ziba, however, remained silent. He neither argued nor defended himself. He had won much, and now he would lose only part of it. Years passed. The Bible does not tell us what became of him, but one thing is clear. Ziba had seized wealth through lies, and though David had allowed him to keep part of Saul's estate, his name would forever be marked by treachery. Meanwhile, Mephibosheth, despite Ziba's betrayal, remained loyal. He still dined at the king's table, his faithfulness evident to all who cared to see. Though crippled, he was remembered for his loyalty. Though slandered, he remained true. His name was preserved, not in riches, but in righteousness. The lesson remains. Though deceit may prosper for a time, truth has a way of rising. Ziba's name, once one of influence, slowly drifted into obscurity. No longer did he stand before David. No longer was he mentioned among those who shaped Israel's destiny. No descendant of Ziba was ever counted. His name, once spoken in the courts of kings, faded from Israel's records. But why does this matter? Because in biblical history, names preserved in genealogies represent God's faithfulness. Meanwhile, Mephibosheth's legacy endured. His son Micah continued his line, 1 Chronicles 8:34-35, proving that righteousness, not deceit, would stand the test of time. The story of Ziba and Mephibosheth teaches us that, in a world driven by ambition and self-interest, deception may bring temporary gain, but truth always prevails. Loyalty and integrity matter more than status, for God sees beyond human judgment and will ultimately bring justice. Betrayal often comes from unexpected places, but rather than seeking revenge, we must trust in divine justice. Even when we lose everything unfairly, grace can restore what was taken. True success is not built on manipulation, but on faithfulness, wisdom, and unwavering trust in God's righteousness. In the end, the truth always wins. Say this prayer with me. Heavenly Father, you are the God of truth, justice, and mercy. As we reflect on the story of Mephibosheth and Ziba, we are reminded of the choices we make each day, the choice to walk in integrity or to be tempted by deception. Lord, search our hearts and cleanse us from any desire to manipulate, deceive, or seek selfish gain. Keep our souls pure before you. Father, we see how Mephibosheth trusted in the king's mercy, even when falsely accused. Help us to trust in your justice, even when we are misunderstood, betrayed, or wronged. Give us the patience to wait on you, knowing that you see everything and that you will vindicate the righteous in your time. We ask for your mercy, Lord. There have been moments when we have acted like Ziba, choosing selfish ambition over truth, seeking our own advantage instead of walking in faithfulness. Forgive us for the times we have put our trust in worldly gain instead of your eternal promises. Help us to be people of honor, even when no one is watching. Let our words be true, our actions be just, and our hearts be steadfast in devotion to you. Like Mephibosheth, may we find our place at your table, not because of our own worthiness, but because of your covenant of grace through Jesus Christ. Lord, establish our legacy in righteousness, that our lives may bring you glory.